Okay, we can go ahead and get started. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Kate Galantich, and on behalf of Carasoft Technology, I would like to welcome you to our webinar, Delivering a Seamless Student Experience, Part 1. And with that, I'm going to go ahead and pass it to our first presenter, Joel.
Thanks, Kate. Hello, I'm Joel Kennedy. I'm the National Sales Manager here at Genesys for the education sector, which includes higher ed and the academic medical institutions that are tied to it, as well as K-12. We welcome you to today's session about delivering students seamless student experience, and this is part 1 of a 3-part series. So we appreciate your participation and attendance. As we look at some of the key things that are really involved around the student experience, we really highlight the areas of the fact that the student experience is very unique for every student that's out there. And we at Genesys have recognized that it's really key to be in front of that and really make that experience very personalized to them, which is a huge transition from what the typical university experience has been. As we look at it, we cover all 3 areas which we feel are the key areas of that student experience, which is from the beginning of recruitment of that student as they're looking at universities and evaluating financial aid situations, to then having those students within the student journey and then focus on the retention of that student, helping them along that course with all the resources, with all the constituents of that university. And then as they complete their experience, then we look to follow up with them for what we call the return. And that's where that student comes back as a treasured alumni to that university, or is able to have their own children attend that university as well. As we're along this path, we also look at the employees and the constituents of the university that are also involved in that journey as well, to ensure that they have all the tools and capabilities to really be in sync with those individuals. So we're contacting those students where they want to be, how they want to be, with what they want to be, and truly making that a very, very personalized experience, not only for those students, but everyone involved with that. We do it by combining the key areas of CX along with digital capabilities, including AI and bots, as well as then combining it all into a realm of orchestration to provide all the elements of a unique and specialized student experience. Today, we're going to have a panel of individuals that really go into more in depth about what those capabilities are. We will be having Brian Chidester, who is the Industry Vice President of Public Sector with Genesys and the host of the Government Huddle with Brian Chidester, a podcast from GovExec. We also have Ryan Odendick, who is a senior solutions consultant with Genesys and a veteran digital transformation and change management leader. Steve Haley joins us as Director of Sales and Business Development from Global Technology Solutions, a partner of Genesys, and he has been in the contact center industry for 22 plus years with extensive experience in all aspects of the project lifecycle. And our key moderator today will be Khalil Yazzie. As an independent strategic advisor, Dr. Yazzie brings a wide-ranging of multi-decades experience in his support for academic institutions and technology companies doing business in the education vertical. So we please ask you to participate with this willing. We will ask you to submit your questions via Q&A, via the chat, and they'll be addressed at that time or at some point at the conclusion of the presentation. At the conclusion of this, you may also feel free to schedule time to chat with any of the panel at your convenience following the call if there are topics that weren't covered or you'd like to go more in depth. With that, I'm going to pass it over to Khalil to have the discussion with our panel. Khalil?
Thanks, Joel. Really appreciate this opportunity. I'm actually looking forward to this conversation with Brian, Steve, and Ryan. And learning something about what it's really like once you get into the practical details of migrating to a digital environment and building student engagement and really in a larger sense, constituency engagement, stakeholder engagement in the higher ed context. This is, as I think was mentioned, the first of 3 webinars with a focus on describing the digital transformation challenge. In part 2, we'll take a deep dive into how and what it takes to get there and provide some more technical detail. In part 3, we'll bring together a panel of peers, campus peers, to give us a reality check and really help us understand, based on their experiences, what works, what doesn't work, a lessons learned kind of an exercise, and also something that gives us some sense of reality in the trenches when you try to get this done. Again, as Joel mentioned, I would just want to reinforce that The audience should feel free to post questions as we go along, and I'll try to weave them into the conversation. I like to keep things in a conversational kind of mode. I think that's going to be helpful to us. To kick things off, I'm going to turn to you, Brian. Really would love to hear your perspectives on the impact of migration to digital formats. What's driving it? What sort of outcomes are people looking for? And perhaps you could start that off by maybe giving us a quick summary of what does it mean to go digital, and you know, how do you see that from your perspective?
Yeah, so I mean, first of all, thanks for the opportunity, and thanks for that opening. To me, what I've seen in my role, and as they mentioned, I'm the vice president of global public sector. What I've seen is that there's so many common challenges across organizations, whether it's government, whether it's industry, no matter where you are. These CXOs or these experience leaders are really struggling with institutionalizing the importance of customer experience. So the question I get all the time is, there's all this technology out there, albeit whether it's contact center and other digital formats, AI, et cetera. If the technology is there, why can't we make these seamless experiences happen for the students, for the faculty, et cetera? And it's around institutionalizing the importance of it at that institution. One of the things that I do when I meet with folks is really, I think about this all the time. It's identity. It's trying to help them find what that identity is. Are they an institution that prioritizes customer experience? And if so, you run every decision that you make through that lens. You find that identity of wanting to deliver superior experiences. So that's the first part, and that's on the strategy side. Second, you talked about kind of what it means to go digital, or even why go digital. I look at this as across four different P's. The first one, and the elephant in the room, is the pandemic, right? It proved that a digital format is incredibly necessary. It's not just that it was the pandemic, but it was the need to be resilient when you had to pivot very quickly. I think when you take a look at educational institutions, higher ed educational institutions, I think there could be something else other than the pandemic that could hit, and you want to have the resilience to be able to pivot. So digital allows for that flexibility, especially the cloud. It allows for that flexibility, agility, and scale. The second is personalization. So when you get to the point that you sold the fact that it's important to focus on CX, and you've invested in digital tools, how do you get to personalization? How can you find ways to leverage data from all the systems that you already have to create personalization at scale, these experiences at scale? That's another reason why you want to go digital, because you can allow for these anticipatory touch points, or these personalized experiences for your students and your faculty and any stakeholder, frankly, that you engage with. So I think personalization is another one why digital is important. I mentioned this before, anticipatory, but the third P to me is predictive. It's creating predictive experiences. When we talk about strategy, one of the things that I do when I sit down with organizations is help them look at what a life cycle could look like for a student at your organization or at your institution. You know that there's going to be an application process, an enrollment process, essentially getting them like an intake into the school, all the way through that life cycle of being a student into graduation and becoming an alumni. So you know what that journey looks like for every single student, albeit it's going to be a little bit different for each, but you know what the general journey is, and you know what the milestones are across that journey, graduation being a really large one. And when they're going to graduate, what are the processes that you have to go through to get to graduation, whether it's academic, whether it's organizational or operational, et cetera? What are those touch points? You can anticipate those ahead of time and drive those touch points to create a more delightful experience. So predictive is another one. And then finally, performance. So if you look inwards, the performance of your employees absolutely will benefit in going to digital channels. When you have the tools in place to help them create these experiences, and at the same time, you're allowing them to work, your employees especially, to work on more strategic tasks so their backlog doesn't get built up. And what do I mean by that? You can automate some of these very these high friction touch points that can be done through technology. You can automate those, so you can leave the employees to deal with more strategic endeavors where they actually have to have human intervention in a challenge. So performance is another thing that will really be key into adoption of digital. Hopefully, Cleo, that answered your question.
Yeah, that was great. You touched on this, Brian, reflecting on the pandemic as a driver for going digital. In your experience in meeting with campus folks and others, have you seen whether the experience that campus leaders and stakeholders have had with shifting to digital engagement modes during the pandemic? Have you seen that provide them with some insights into the value of going digital as a strategic imperative rather than just a reactionary move to satisfy themselves over the near term? So do you see persistence in a meaningful way? Meaning, are they thinking about it? Are they willing to put the effort and the time and commitment to doing that?
Yeah. So, I mean, first of all, the short answer is 100%. The knee-jerk reaction that the pandemic created, I'm sure anybody listening here has heard this a million times. While the pandemic was obviously not a good thing socially, economically, physically, there were still some positives that came out of it. One of them was that it necessitated change. One of the biggest ones is shifting operations into a cloud-based format to allow for that pivot and that scale and that agility. Now, you had a number of CIOs within higher ed that maybe hadn't made that change for a multitude of reasons. The number one reason was generally security, right? There's others where they just didn't understand certain consumption models, et cetera. When they had to make that change, albeit a draconian one, it really forced their hand into adoption. And what they realized is, oh, this is much better than what we had. I don't know why we didn't do this sooner. So you had organizations at varying degrees of maturity, but every single one of them generally adopted something that helped them pivot during the pandemic that they're incorporating into their strategic vision as they move forward, which a lot of institutions are doing right now as we're getting out of kind of the pandemic world. We're into that post-pandemic world, and they're looking to make these strategic decisions with these new adopted technologies that they've taken on.
Do you think on the industry supply, provider side, we're ready to support these institutions as they go forward?
Oh, definitely. I mean, like I mentioned earlier, that question I get all the time. The technology is absolutely there. I think what we've seen, and this isn't just unique to education, this is really this is something that is pervasive across the entirety of the public sector. The other thing that the pandemic really did was it kind of took that massive gap between the private sector and the public sector, and it closed it, and it allowed for public sector to really lean on these technology companies for not only selling them technology, but for guidance in certain things, right?
Right.
Yeah, because I mean, we at Genesys, we've scaled with some of the largest commercial companies in the world. We look at, I mean, some of the pivots that were made by companies like Target. I mean, Target's a big customer of ours, and we're doing this in real time with these massive commercial companies where ROI is key. And don't get me wrong, within education, especially, ROI is certainly key. But
don't tell the faculty that.
but they were looking for some of these opportunities to learn, and I think that's where we and Genesys, I mean, and companies on the technology side, I feel like I should speak for all the private sector. We kind of missed the boat in finding ways to do a better job of guiding them. But this was an opportunity, and I think we're finally seeing that it's a conversation now. For the longest time, there was a I'll throw a Heisman football term out there. You throw in the Heisman, right? Or college football term, throw in the Heisman. You had these institutions kind of holding the private sector at an arm's length. And now it was, okay, I see the benefit. I see this relationship can be helpful. And it's coming in and it's becoming a conversation, not just a one-way selling motion. I think that's changed the game dramatically.
Thank you. That actually, I think, given the rapidity of change and emerging technologies that are showing up almost constantly, I think that's a key point in terms of we've got to create better and more effective collaboration between the providers and the consumers of these technologies.
Well, Cleo, one more thing. I think, and I really like the slide that Joel had up previously. It showed the complexity of what the student journey looks like now, or the educational journey looks like now. There's so many different touch points that you're going to be able to interact with these students. So going about that human-centered design process, building strategy, but also understanding that it's a completely omni-channel world. And you need to make sure you're fully integrated into your systems already, leveraging those data points that you already have to create better decisions across this a lot more complex journey now.
Thanks for that, Brian. Steve, I want to pick that thread up with you. One of the challenges of building a personalized student engagement approach is that students don't compartmentalize how they view the information in the same way the institution compartmentalizes their view of the student. From the institutional side, you'll have the registrar view the student one way, student accounting view them a different way, financial aid a different way, admissions a different way, et cetera. So it's really a challenge for the institution and for the student to get that unified view. And in that sense, building a personalized student engagement approach, that person-centric, individual-centric approach is a bit of a challenge. Now, I know that you now have an entering freshman this year. Congratulations. And the best to you and your family for that. It's always traumatic. I've gone through the same experience a couple of times. Could you talk a little bit about some of the challenges from that personal experience? How has it gone for you and your student in terms of engaging with the institution, and maybe build on that to highlight some of the areas where this notion of omni-channel, this notion of personalizing it into a unified view really has value?
Yeah, thanks for that, Khalil. Yeah, so I do have a freshman in university this year. And I also have a high school junior, so we're going to go through the same process with her coming up pretty soon, with looking for where she wants to go and everything. So one thing I did want to touch on real quick before I jump into your point, Khalil, was when you look at the overall experience of college visits and where they want to go and everything, it's a wide array of what colleges offer. From we have the latest dorms and the latest restaurants, and look at our gym, but the academics may not be where they should be because they're doing all the bells and whistles to try and attract somebody. Whereas one of the schools that my oldest looked at that had great academics, they had forced water radiators in the rooms with no air conditioners, right? So
hey, been there.
Where it was, right?
30 years, I've seen it all.
Yeah, exactly. And so one of the things that made me think about that was, so you've got all these different tactics that universities and colleges are using to attract and retain students with new facilities, whether it's, whether you're an athlete or whether it's new technology centers, restaurants, dorms, that kind of thing. Well, this omni-channel and a seamless single front door experience is something that's an investment that colleges should take a look at, because that is also, to your point, Khalil, important for not only the students, but the faculty and staff and the parents. So the one thing that my daughter has experienced is, she's got a student portal where she has any notifications of, okay, this is what your fall payment looks like. This is when you have to have these books procured, and these are the ones that could be, you have to buy actually physical copy versus these can be, downloaded. So she gets all that via the portal, and my wife and I don't get any of that. She is taking care of that, and she lets us know if there's something we have to hop in. But that's also where she can schedule with her counselor where there's any kind of announcements from the school, if there's, potential weather delays coming up, because she is in the mountains of Pennsylvania. There are going to be snow days. It's going to be, cold and crazy up there. And anything as far as schedule changes, if she has to go in and request a schedule change for some reason because the class isn't working out, or if there's another class that she would rather take at that time, of course, it's got to be with a certain spot. It's all within the student portal. So for her perspective, there's a lot of communication that's available to her. Where I'm starting to see some with not only her university, but other of our potential clients, is they're looking at engaging more on the faculty and facilities side of that as well. So if you have a facilities and operations center where you may have somebody call up and say the AC went out in classroom 205 in this building, they want to be able to tie that into the overall information system so it can be automated to a back-end CRM or ERP system. Somebody calls in with a ticket number where it's faculty or a student, and they can just, they can put in the ticket number and that information can pop up and they can give them a quick status. So one of the other things that I found interesting too is one of the universities that, which is actually my alma mater, so I was proud of. My daughter didn't go there, but when we went there to take a look at it, I'm like, this looks nothing like when I went there 1 or 2 years ago, right? But one of the things they had, which I thought was pretty cool as far as the technology thing, was they had an app for incoming students, which is like it's a roommate finder. Think of, a dating app. They would go in and they would fill out a profile. I like to study during the day, or I like to study at night. I like this type of music. I like these kind of movies. This is what my major is going to be. These are the sports. And it had a ton of questions you could ask, and then it would have an algorithm and send you what they thought was a good match. And to me, that was brilliant, because where my daughter is now going, they didn't have that. And it's not that she doesn't get along with her roommate. They just don't have anything in common. So they keep to themselves in the room. It's very quiet, which I think is good, because my daughter needs that at times. She doesn't need to be, all the noise all the time. But at the end of the day, she's going to end up with a different roommate next year. One of the good friends she's already made at school. So, but I thought that was a cool technology aspect of it. So one of the other things that my wife and I have noticed too is there are a lot of social media groups for the students and parents of the students. And that, like most social media, it's a good and a bad thing. But having an omni-channel solution in a university, you could tie into those different social media groups and monitor those for trends. Like one of the trends we saw as the students were moving into my daughter's university was, if my student needs to have their bed raised, because they would put them on these platform things so they can fit these big shelves underneath it, and facilities hasn't come, how do I get them, to make that phone call? And that was such a topic of conversation that first parents Facebook group. My thought was, if there was an AI bot listening to that, it could automatically detect that and say, well, here's the link to that thing that you can send to your students, and they know how to take care of that with facilities, as an example of the social media aspect of it. So there's a lot of different ways that you could have tied into the omnichannel experience across the board. And I think this was touched on a little bit before, but I think it's important too that there is a decrease of enrollments over the last couple of years, whether that's just an effect of the pandemic itself, whether it's just an overall trend across the country. So using a cloud-based omnichannel solution for proactively recruiting students and retaining those students is also key. Because obviously the fewer students enrolled, the less revenue coming to the university, the less money they have to spend on things to keep students. So it's just sort of it's a vicious cycle. So, and not that you want to get in there and over
experience that too. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And not, but it's also a double-sided coin, because some universities over enroll. So you can't graduate in 4 years because you can't get some of the classes you need because there's too many students. Not sure if that's happening now, but it's a delicate balance. But just being able to use proactive notifications, again, to the students' liking, whether it's email, SMS, phone calls, however, that's all part of the omnichannel experience that can be built in. So it's all in the back-end platform that they can abstract that data, for engaging with students and faculty alike.
So as you're thinking this through, you said some things that sort of suggested some questions through my mind. One is, as you think about, something like the pandemic happening while your daughter's, in the middle of a semester, as did happen in fact, a couple of years ago. do you, and looking at what kind of digital experiences there existent and available, how comfortable are you with the idea that, there might be a need for her to go online, for that experience to go from an on-campus experience to a more completely digital kind of an experience, and maybe talk a little bit about how creating that digital environment and that digital experience connection kind of to the campus allows us to transition, and in particular, how it might help a remote student, a student who, for whatever reason, really can't go to campus and be on premise, but needs to be remote.
Yeah, and I think, and my daughter's actually experienced that already in a hybrid sort of situation. Her math teacher, I believe, had knee surgery and can't get to the class. So he transitioned for the first few weeks into a digital experience for the class. And he's going to be able to come back into the classroom. So that's one thing I think we can thank the pandemic for, is now universities and, K through 12 were prepared for that kind of situation. What that means potentially for snow days, if they're going to have class anyway, I don't know, because that may make some students upset. She'll have to deal with that when she gets to it. But I think,
there's actually some talk about, we're not going to have snow days this year because we'll just go digital.
Yeah,
I've actually heard that.
Yeah.
As a policy position,
that's what happened with my kid's school district last year. Was they didn't go snow days. They were given assignments, so they completed those. And it wasn't counted towards a snow day. So, but that goes along that line too. Just the notification piece. If there is a snow day, if a class is canceled, that comes to my daughter's portal. So it goes back to that digital experience if something does happen. But I think, and in my daughter's situation, the university she goes to is in a new, it's called Commonwealth University in Pennsylvania, where they partner with two universities. And within those, if there's a class that she needs for her major that's not available this semester, she needs it at her physical location, she could take it remotely with one of the two other partner universities. So that's also another aspect of the digital piece of it. So it keeps her on track, and she's able to get it, and it's full credit across, and there's no additional cost for tuition. Same if, one of the other two universities is using, one of the courses from her school. So it's a good digital back and forth. And I think, again, part of that is can be contributed to how everything ramped up so quickly with the pandemic.
Right. No, I think you're actually pointed to a really interesting area of capability. We have heard, I have heard, having been in higher ed for most of my career, for almost all of my career, actually, that retention and graduation rates are sort of the key to whether the university is performing well. And in that sense, the scope of the experience that you can create by leveraging these kinds of technologies and unifying them in a meaningful way for the student means you don't have to stay an extra semester because you missed a class that you have to have in order to graduate. You're not feeling left out or frustrated as a student and decide to drop out because you can't get the classes you want and get into the major you want, proceed as you'd like. So I would expect that retention rates and graduation rates should improve if we use these technologies effectively. Is that, I think that's where you were headed with those ideas and what you brought up.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, because it's key because I entered college. I had to sign a contract with my dad. He goes, "You get 4 years. That's it. You graduate, great. If you don't, that's on you." So but it is important. Especially because she's going for a medical imaging degree, and she's going to have 2 or 1 years of clinical, and so there's going to be a point where she needs to graduate at that time. So, having that ability to make sure that she's able to take those courses and graduate on schedule it's really important, and having that digital capability to where even if she's got to do it over a summer class, that's a great option to have.
That speaks to Brian's comment on predictability, I think, in a really effective way. Shifting gears a little bit, and Steve, I'll start with you, but then pivot maybe to Ryan's thoughts on this. You mentioned that there was an app that helped you find a roommate matching app. As I think we all know, the beauty of SaaS applications is you can build one and put it out there and make it operational pretty much overnight. So we're going to see lots of these little apps show up that help students navigate a campus, tell you how to get to someplace, tell you where you might get a meal, and maybe support you in other ways. What in the example you provided, how do you view the problem of app sprawl in an environment where we're trying to achieve something like an omni-channel presence and unify that? What's your sense of that? And then maybe Ryan, you could pick up on that, and Brian, feel free to chime in.
Well, I think, initial thought on that would be just to keep it to a central app. I mean, and I know that's difficult. I mean, but if it's in a central repository like that, it's always something that you could use to pull data from, to even give suggestions, especially if you've got something like it's a GPS awareness, if you're on a big enough campus like Penn State, and it says, hey, it's almost dinner time. Did you know this place over here, if you have some sort of IoT system saying there's only a 5-minute wait to get into this restaurant, maybe consider going to there. So there's that kind of thing, as another app, app sprawl, right?
They're all over the place.
So
Yeah.
it's all over, right? So it just depends on how you want to do it. But if it's all tied into a central, omni-channel, to where even the contact center piece of it for inbound, outbound calls and stuff can still pull off that data, that's the important piece, I think. It's just making sure it's all tied together somehow. So, and I think, we're going to touch on this a little bit of what that actually looks like, but it's having that data available to help make some of those decisions, whether it's proactive or reactive, right?
Brian, you any thoughts on that? Go ahead, Ryan.
Yeah, I'll just throw in quickly that I agree with Steve. I think there's the Brian mentioned personalization before, right? To make it feel like this is like how I engage. And I think there's probably a break point where we love the convenience of the app and maybe able to spin something up quickly, but there's probably a break point where the convenience is difficult when I'm not sure which one I'm supposed to log into, or I'm on the 4th thing I have to download just to kind of navigate around my my institution. So I do think that app sprawl, we've heard omni-channel a lot today, you can get to that kind of point where I feel like everything feels like custom tailored to me. And I always feel like I'm having this consistent experience with the school, whether I'm on the app, logged into their web portal, getting a notification, as Steve mentioned, about a snow day or something like that, that consistency is really important to having the students engage with you.
Brian, any thoughts on the problem of, which social network do you use, which app do you use, and when?
No, I mean, I agree with all the points. I mean, what you just said, brings me back to a couple of years ago when my cable provider had like 4 different apps, and one of them was to pay your bill, but the other one was to watch TV, and another one was to do something else. And
mine's still like that, by the way.
I never knew which one to open, and it was generally just I needed to go pay my bill. And so I think being able to consolidate, and we're seeing that a lot, where you can consolidate a lot of these organizations are having their student websites be that, or their main websites be a single front door portal, where you just go there and you can access anything. You use the term omni-channel, Ryan. I think that's so important. It's that integration into all these different systems through kind of one platform. And I Steve, you touched on it too. It's not having all these kind of disparate places to go, but having one place to go. And when you can make it that simple, I look at it as you're not wasting my time, and that's a delightful experience, right?
Yeah. And if you're talking to one provider, you expect them to already know you when you log in, no matter which way you come in. And that's really reflective of the kind of experience that students will have on a campus. Well, most typically today is that, you're talking to the registrar who doesn't know anything about your relationship to financial aid, and that presents a challenge.
Yep.
Ryan, as a solutions engineer, you got some hands-on experience with these kinds of challenges. Could you maybe provide some highlights from your experience and working with campuses, talk a little bit about what it takes to get it done, and how do you do it? You know, it's what's it going to take? How long should it take? You know, how important it is to get people together on planning, et cetera.
Yeah, well, I'll say that planning is absolutely key, right? You have a lot of agreement to come to. There's a lot of governance that needs to be navigated around. It's not something that can be spun up in 2 days, type of thing. So having a plan to go through this type of transformation is really important. You know, so just in my personal experiences, some challenges that you face are just resistance to change in general. I think is tough, and we've all experienced that probably in our own personal and professional lives. I don't want to get, I'm not going to talk too much about technology today. So actually, you know what I'll do is I'll put in my plug for part 2 of the webinar series, where we will dive into the technology behind a lot of these things that we're hearing about. Because one of the great things about Genesys is we solve for a lot of these challenges on a daily basis, and we've done it for other higher ed institutions. But things like, you know, we've heard the word integration a lot, right? Like, you know, there's so many systems that they have, you know, an SIS system for enrollment, class schedules, their grades, an ERP system that tackles accounting, a service desk, a ticketing system for facilities and service requests, a fundraising system for alumni and parents, and and it keeps going on. And you know, it's just important that you're pulling data from this. You know, Steve mentioned a lot about, like, hey, you want to be able to pull the data because the intelligence is the key to understanding what the needs are of the students and these other kind of constituent types. But you might also need to write data to those, right? So keeping them up to date and consistent.
Right.
And alumni calls, and they want a transcript, and you find, you know, the agent finds out, like, hey, their address needs to be updated, and does that need to be updated in multiple, you know, disparate systems, but potentially
Owned by different people who don't want to let go of the stewardship role. Yeah,
exactly, right. Yeah, and that gets back into that kind of having, you know, we're like coaxing people to be adaptable to change, right, and try new things.
Right.
Yeah. So, you know, the other thing that, you know, Brian talked earlier about performance, you know, and freeing up kind of your staff, right, your student workers and your staff to focus on high priority, you know, impactful things where maybe bots can handle FAQs and scheduling an advising appointment, or sending a text message to remind them that, hey, your tuition's due, right? And it's all done proactively, and it's all done kind of automatically, so that you're freeing up that time of your important staff to do the things that really require that high touch, and could potentially have an impact on, you know, you mentioned some of the factors.
Right.
Retention. Retention is an important thing. If I have a really bad experience, I'm probably less likely to stick around. So, yeah.
So
Go ahead.
Go ahead. Keep going.
Yeah, well, I was going to mention the other thing was just from like the omni-channel experience, right? You know, reinforce what we've kind of heard a little bit about today, but you know, it can be hard if you have a multi-channel environment and ecosystem where you have a single solution provider for SMS and email and social, and everything is different. You either got to kind of reinvent the wheel, or the student's just not going to have a consistent experience, right? So, you know, an example would be, say you create a bot to send automated text messages, and then you have to go recreate that for voice. And now I got to maintain 2 things. And, you know, with Genesys, with an omnichannel experience, you create one bot, and it doesn't matter if it's email, text, chat, voice, right? That one bot can handle everything. And then that also increases the flexibility for those that are working, you know, for the agents, right? So if a student's, you know, on their tablet and they're chatting with an agent, and they're like, oh, I got to get to class, right? They can switch on the fly from a chat to a phone call, and that's one interaction, right? It's not, you know, so when talking about, you know, like Steve, you know, being able to have that data and back it up, right? I can pool the entire experience of that student regardless of what channel, because they're really only interacting with one single front end system.
So in that sense, it's really building a unifying layer around what currently exists in the legacy environment on a campus. Is that fair?
Yeah.
You don't have to re-engineer everything.
No, absolutely not. Yeah, and that's one of the, you know, I'll put in a second plug for part 2. We have a lot of partners and integrations, and we can, you know, your existing CRM, and we can integrate with that. And there's a lot of benefits to working with Genesys when it comes to solving some of those challenges.
So you know, to open this up a little bit, Brian, Steve, and Ryan chime in on this issue. I think, given where we are, we've had the silver lining coming out of the pandemic relative to digital transformation being, it really forced us to look at what was happening and how we were doing things. And it forced us to change in a reactive way. Looking at it from a more strategic perspective, it's often a case that the technical folks know what's possible. The IT shop is pretty comfortable with where the technologies are going. You can see the light at the end of the tunnel on it and see where things are headed. But it's harder to change the way administrators, middle management, and senior executives think about the problem. The pandemic sort of opened the eyes of senior management and leadership around what this could be. Brian, maybe starting with you, how is that governance challenge best dealt with? I mean, I'm sure you've talked to a lot of folks in the leadership roles, as they begin to create the imperative to shift and start pushing on it strategically, getting the various layers of, operational management to align. What do you see really needs to happen there in order to make that possible?
Yeah, I mean, alignment is key, right? One of the things that, and I use this phrase all the time, one of the things that I think is so paramount from good leadership within an organization is decentralized command, right? It doesn't mean that everybody's going off doing their own thing. What it means is everybody's empowered to be able to make decisions based on their aligned priorities, their aligned goals. So there's so many different lines of business, so many different challenges within these large institutions, that if you try to micromanage every single one, that you're never going to get what you need. And when you get it, it's never going to help. So you need to be able to decentralize those decisions across your organization, empower your, not even senior leaders, but empower your entire team to be able to do their due diligence, find the vendor that works, knowing what the priorities are of the institution, albeit security priorities, interoperability priorities. All of those obviously have to be vetted, and they all have to plug in. You can't shove a square peg in a round hole, but allow them to go out and find the right round peg for that hole. I think that's important. The other thing I want to double down on, and Ryan, I'm really glad you brought this up, is change management and usage and adoption. We went through a period of time where change management and adoption really weren't necessary because you had to do it. It was as draconian as it gets. If you didn't know how to use Microsoft Teams or Zoom or Google Meets, whatever, you had to learn because you had to be able to facilitate collaboratively on those platforms. It didn't make a difference. And there's a multitude of different technologies where that was the case, right?
Right.
So adoption really wasn't a challenge. You had to. Now, as you build out your strategy, you have to remember enablement and adoption is absolutely something that you need to be more intentional about. And you can't take for granted that people are just going to do it anymore. So something to think about too.
Steve, you're in between Genesys and the customer in a sense. You're helping them do this.
Great place to be, Steve.
Yeah, it is a good place to be. From your vantage point, how does that work? Is as you're talking to customers and getting their sense of what they want versus what you kind of know they need. Problem. How do you? What's been your experience, and how do you work through all that?
Well, I typically just lead it as just a normal conversation. I get the customer to start talking about in their vision what they either have challenges with or where they think they want to go, and then we just start to dive deeper into that. And more times than not, it takes them down a path they never even considered. And especially when it comes to any kind of digital experience, customer experience like that, there's a lot of things to account for that they may not have done. I also take a look at it from a design thinking perspective too, of who are all the stakeholders, who are all the personas, how is this, who all is this going to affect? It's not just going to affect, one group and another group. There's a lot of other groups that are on the periphery of those two groups that may seem like stakeholders. So you got to account for all of those aspects as well. And that also brings in new things that have to be accounted for too. And kind of one thing to touch on, one of the things that Brian had just mentioned too about, how do you, or even the question you had about that management layer. I think prior to the pandemic, you would have had to consider a lot of training for faculty and staff to have a different way of thinking to engage with their students in a digital way. But post-pandemic, because of how everything shifted so quickly, it's not as much training, I think, in teaching the teachers as it may have been in the past, but there's still some of that because you still have some people who are maybe stuck in their old ways of doing things, and here's your paper syllabus. I'm going to, call you on the phone if class is canceled, that kind of thing. And, knowing today's 18 to 22-year-olds, they don't ever call anybody, daughter doesn't answer my phone calls, Yeah,
so, they don't accept your texts, they don't accept your phone calls, and you're stuck trying to figure out whether you should try to DM them in Instagram or TikTok.
I will say to my daughter's credit, and maybe this is just me because I'm crusty like that. I do send her a daily dad joke, and she shares it with her friends. So at least I've got some credibility.
You need your own TikTok channel, man.
Yeah,
and then Ryan will integrate it and everything else for you.
There you go.
So
make it easy.
Yeah. So Ryan, in your experience, how well are campuses reacting? I mean, Steve brought up an interesting point, and that is, before the pandemic, if you asked faculty whether they're willing to go online, they'd probably tell you no, for the most part. And if you asked them, what do you need before we can get you to agree to go online, it would be training and preparation and digital content and all that stuff. And then lo and behold, within probably 2 weeks, when the pandemic hit, pretty much every university in the country and around the world went digital, and all these faculty who argued that they couldn't do it were suddenly doing it without a problem. So it's sort of this latent capability that they all had. How do you see that resistance playing out? And for the business owner, the gal or the guy that's trying to bring this capability to the campus, what obstacles are they running into that are not really technical?
Well, there's a few things. So one, I think you mentioned before about executives and CIOs and how they think about things, and I think one of the things like you want to if you're gonna sell your house, right? One of the first things you do is look at comparables, right? Who has done something similar at a similar price and is happy about how things went out. And I think that's when we're looking at technology and you want to bring it in, there's that kind of similar element of we want to feel confident that we're working with a company that has a lot of experience doing this.
Right.
So that's big, right? It's not like a startup, and we're coming in and we know we've done this for other institutions. So I think that can help with kind of the adoption component, that people feel like, hey, other schools have done this. They've kind of showed us some comparables, right? To as an example. And I think that on top of that, we've kind of used the pandemic example a lot, that everybody in their personal lives probably adapted in a similar way. So you're bringing some of those things that you kind of had to adapt to. And everybody early on was doing like Zoom calls with their families or virtual happy hours, right? Where they used to do these things in person. But then there is another side to that, which is, this kind of like return to normalcy that maybe we hear about, like, hey, I want to go back to the way things were. I just don't think that that's really going to be possible. And I think that that's what we're seeing, right? Is that the benefits are so outweighing, the resistance that was originally out there, that if 3 years ago he said, hey, we want to do this, it's like, I don't want to learn a whole new system. I don't want to have to put all my employees through training, right? And now that they've seen that they can adapt, I do think that the barrier to entry there, like the resistance to change, is a little bit smaller and a little faster to jump. I see Brian wants to chime in too. So yeah.
No, I agree wholeheartedly. I mean, that is you're spot on in terms of kind of that. The other thing I was going to say, and when you get beyond just the technology, is we hear human-centered design all the time. You can say student-centered design. I mean, how do you design these journeys for the students in a very bespoke and intentional way? It's not the technology that's important most of the time. It's making sure strategically you have everything in line. The technology is just a facilitator, but the strategy and the expertise that goes into creating those journeys, to me, is probably the biggest undertaking that an institution should really prioritize. We've been doing this where we sit down with these organizations and we help them map these journeys out across the entire life cycle of what a student looks like, or what a citizen looks like, or a consumer. And it's game changing when you can really strategically take a look at that and then think about the technology and layer it in. So I think that's another thing that I would just add on. But I mean, Steve, you're spot on too in terms of kind of inundating the teams with more things. That was definitely an inhibitor, and now it's possible all of a sudden.
Amazing how well we adapt. Somebody asked me what I thought of the technology, and I said the great thing about it, it's foolproof, so I can even use it. That's as an aside. So and Brian, you kind of mentioned this, in the early part of the conversation around the need for partnership here and the collaboration between community of practice on the consumer side and providers of services to that community of practice. In terms of building better approaches, and to the point Ryan was making about, do I have confidence in my partners here as a consumer, as a customer? What's your track record and how well have you done? How well do you know what I'm going through? It's really a question of, if you don't know my pain points and can't intuitively recognize them in some degree of empathy, then you're not going to really solve my problem for me. How important is it and value added is it to build relationships and partnerships at a community of practice level? And I see that in two ways. One is just creating that sense of confidence that we've built a better relationship between, our company providing Genesys, providing services to the community, GTS supporting them, and those people that are going to use our technology. The other is, as a SaaS application, you have an opportunity to leverage, to mine the data that's coming in an appropriate way, right? I'm not presuming to violate privacy, but to use that so that you can better inform best practices and guidance and approaches, and create a more a more shareable kind of rinse and repeat kind of an approach. What do you think?
The relationships are paramount, I think, especially when, as a technology vendor, you want to be that trusted advisor for the groups that are going through it. But one of the things, and I say this very respectively, but you were talking about understanding pain points, and I would argue that we know our customers' pain points better than they do sometimes. We're going. It's generally not because they're doing anything wrong, other than they're looking inward. They're looking at their operational challenges. They're not looking outward. And at Genesys, what we're doing is spending a whole lot of time as we're doing this journey mapping across the spectrum of what a student looks like across that journey. We're then surveying, querying students around where the friction points are. How are universities doing, right? And we can do it at a very bespoke level, university by university, to tell them, here's how you're doing during the application process. And oh, by the way, here's how you're doing during the submission part of the application process. Or here's how you're doing on the guidance part of the application process. Getting very, very granular, because we have the scale to be able to do it. And I think that's the differentiator.
Does that include an ability to compare it to others?
Yes, absolutely. So benchmark data around what standards are, 100%. And to me, and going back to what I mentioned before around great leadership, another component of great leadership is wanting to know where your blind spots are. And what really differentiates us from other organizations is we're trying to work with our customers to help them understand their blind spots. And then based on our knowledge, give them recommendations on how they can help
Right.
remediate those. That to me is where, again, you can get beyond technology and really focus on where are you challenged? Where are the friction points across your enterprise? And oh, by the way, here's how we can help you fix them.
Steve, Ryan, any last comments as we hit the top of the hour here?
No, I think this has been great. This has been a great first session. I'm looking forward to the second one. We can dive.
Steve, you need to bring a dad joke to the second session.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, we want to see
I'll
that.
try and keep it as a clean dad joke, so.
Or you could post your TikTok channel and we'll watch it.
I'll just throw out that, we've kept the conversation kind of high level. Brian just mentioned, we get beyond the technology, but if you want to hear more about the technology that powers
Yeah.
all, make sure you sign up for webinar number 2.
Yeah, look forward to webinar number 2. I think this was great conversation, gentlemen. I really appreciate the time and the thoughtfulness of the session. Really enjoyed it. Look forward to the next one. Joel, thank you very much. If you want to add some closing remarks, we can close it out.
Absolutely, Khalil. I appreciate it and appreciate everything that this panel contributed to this discussion. I think you brought a lot of enlightenment about the position that we're taking with the student experience and how the over encompassing experience is really key to making it very personal to those individuals. As I mentioned before, we do have a part 2 of this series, so we look forward to that. But even prior to that, if you have questions of anyone on this panel, we would encourage you to reach out to us. In addition to that, we would like to have a call of action of next steps in that call to us to discuss with you, how do you get started with this? And getting started with that would be definitely be in contact with someone on this panel, as well as just looking at your own environment, identifying where are you today. Do you have limitations on how you are servicing and supporting that student experience? And where could you use some assistance from outside to look at that? That's what we're here for. We're here to be a resource to assist you with that. And I, again, appreciate all the time that you shared and contributed to participating on this event. And we look forward to seeing you on part 2 of this series. Thanks, everyone. Have a great day.